Dr. Shepard, you mentioned a vaccine. Do you have any thoughts on what that will look like, when it will be developed, and kind of give us at least your opinion on a timeline for when we might see a vaccine developed and rolled out in the United States and in the world?
Yes. Vaccines are key to managing what really is a natural process. This is not an unusual event. It's just unusual that it has occurred with such rapidity and severity. But this is a natural process. And a vaccine is what makes the seasonal flu, which occurs annually in a very similar fashion to this pandemic, manageable, because it reduces both the transmissibility, so it reduces the R value of seasonal flu, and it also reduces the case fatality rate, which is probably what's driving so much of our fear and panic response to this particular pandemic, because the case fatality rate looks so high and makes us scared of it. Whereas the flu and its vaccine have made that a manageable risk that we're all willing to take. The first vaccine candidate, and notice I use my words carefully because it is only an experimental candidate vaccine that may or may not work, began its safety trials, so its phase 1 safety trial, 2 weeks ago with the first enrollment of patients in Washington State. And the nature of vaccine development is a very prolonged one, much more prolonged than treatments for illnesses, because the medical community tends to be extremely conservative. And our mantra, the Hippocratic Oath, dictates that we first do no harm. And if you think about it, vaccines are interventions, drugs really, given to perfectly healthy people that have no signs of illness at all. And so any toxicity in a vaccine is unacceptable, because you're essentially treating someone that doesn't have a disease and is being protected against that disease. And toxicity studies, side effect studies, the safety studies that we're in right now for the development of coronavirus vaccine, because of that, are very prolonged. A large number of patients have to be enrolled in them, and they have to be followed over an extended period of time. And only then, once an immunization is considered to be safe, do the efficacy studies start, i.e., does it actually work? Will it protect people from this infection? And that's another phase of investigation that has to take place. And so taking all those together, really a timeline of at least 12 months, in my mind, significantly longer will be required to develop a vaccine that has at least enough efficacy. It doesn't have to be 100% protective, as the flu vaccines never are, but it has to blunt the severity and the transmissibility of the infection. And that's probably going to take at least 18 months. And so we're looking at dealing with this new pandemic strain of virus, probably for at least 1 or 2 more cycles of infection across the globe before we have a vaccine.
And Doctor, real quick, I know Scott's about to ask you a question, but just to follow up on that, what does a cycle look like? What's the length of a cycle as you describe it?
We don't know. I mean, we're in the midst of the first one, so no one really knows. What I think is reasonable to speculate is that this will be a seasonal event, such that other coronaviruses that we know about are seasonal viruses. They come in the fall and winter, along with flu and some other upper respiratory tract viruses to cause illness. And so it would be reasonable to assume that this particular virus will become a seasonal virus that will rise in cases in the fall through the winter, and then begin to diminish in the spring. But remember that we are in the midst of widespread community transmission moving into springtime and summer in the Northern Hemisphere in a very unique situation. The first arrival of this virus, where none of us has any level of immunity at all. So we've not been exposed before. We haven't recovered from COVID. We're entirely naive, which is the sort of technical term for someone who's completely susceptible in the population, with widespread community transmission ongoing right now on the 1st of April. And so my suspicion is that for this first round, we may not get too much of a break with seasonality, because we're in a spreading brand new infection in a totally susceptible population. And therefore, any reduction in its transmissibility through the warmer months in the Northern Hemisphere will be blunted. And we may see continued transmission going into the fall season. And just as an aside, remember that the nature of global infections is that when we move into out of viral season into the spring and summer, the Southern Hemisphere is moving into its seasonal transmission in fall and winter. And so the seasonal flu and pandemic flus tend to circulate the globe according to the seasons in any particular region at any particular time. So I'm not sure we're going to get much of a break this year.